Hello everybody, and welcome to a little bit of a different sort of video coming from me. Unlike the vast majority of videos on this channel, outside of my One Piece reviews, this one is going to be completely unscripted. It's going to be a bit of a ramble, there's not going to be much of a structure to it, or it's not going to be completely unscripted, but mostly unscripted. We'll get into that in a little bit. So there's going to be a lot of umming and awing, a bit of rambling. I'm going to repeat points, I won't be very concise. I'll stumble over my words a bit, so just sorry in advance for that. If that isn't something you want, feel free to click away. If that is something you're okay with, then welcome in. We're going to be talking about the thing that everyone seems to be talking about lately, the last few days, Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 236. Now, this is one of the most important shonen chapters in a long time, probably the most important chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, arguably, and everyone has a take on it. Everyone and their mother has a take on it. It is a worldwide phenomenon. There are people in Chile who are dedicating stuff to it. Spoilers again, if you didn't click off when I asked you to earlier. Spoilers. Okay, we're gonna spoil everything. There are people dedicating shrines to Gojo in grief, in all over the world. There are newspapers being handed out about Gojo, and the chapter isn't even officially out yet. So this chapter is crazy. It's a phenomenon, and everyone has a take on it, and like most things on the internet, I feel like discourse has gotten a bit toxic, it's gotten a bit poisonous. The stuff I'm going to say in today's video, I actually just wanted to say in a Twitter thread. I wanted to just put a Twitter thread out there and talk about my thoughts and what I think about it, but I don't know, I think I want to avoid that today. I don't really tend to avoid that a lot of the time, but for this sort of thing, I figured it would be best to put a video out there. So I will be referring to that Twitter thread throughout this and just adding my points here and there to sort of supplement it. Now, to get to what I actually think, as the video title of this says, I loved Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 236. I think it was a masterpiece. I have maybe one minor problem with it that I'll get into later, but overall it is one of the best chapters of the series. It might be my favorite chapter in the series, and it is one of the best chapters I've read this year, and I have read hundreds. I've read hundreds of One Piece chapters, many of which are right up there in terms of my favorites. I've read hundreds of Naruto chapters, and Naruto has quickly become a strong favorite of mine as well. And I don't remember if the Hunter x Hunter chapters released in late 2022 or early 2023, but I'm including those too, and all of Akane Banashi, and stuff like that. Long and short, I think it was phenomenal. Now, just in advance, I just want to say that my take on this, I'm going to explain a few of the reasons why I thought it was great, but I'm mostly going to dwell on why I think some of the criticisms don't really land for me personally, why I don't really buy into them, or why I don't agree, while completely respecting them, of course. So just to keep in mind, these are going to be the things I find most noteworthy, but they aren't necessarily going to be the things that... It's not going to be comprehensive. I'm not going to talk about everything in this video. So if you're expecting that, that's not what this is going to be. I'm going to miss points, simply because they just aren't things that I'm thinking about right now or that I think to be super noteworthy and pertinent to this video. But if I miss anything, or if you want to add something, please feel free to do so in the comments. There are lots of people who have put great thought pieces out about it on Twitter. For example, that's where I've seen most of it, and they talk about all sorts of other things. I'm not going to be comprehensive here, though. So I love this chapter. I think it was beautifully presented, beautifully structured. I think it was shocking in the best possible way, and not just in terms of shock value. I've watched lots of series, or experienced lots of series, where they do things for shock value, and I'm not going to name names because that's not the point here, but I am not someone who just loves shock for shock's sake. If it doesn't serve a narrative purpose, and if I don't feel like it's substantial, I really dislike it. And I think this was very substantial. I think this was a gut punch in the best possible way. I think it was, it flowed beautifully dramatically. I think all the emotions hit. Essentially, Gojo, he was around my top 3 characters in Jujutsu Kaisen, and after this, he is without doubt my favorite in the story, and one of my favorites in shonen in general, and this chapter kind of nailed home why. He is such a complex, nuanced character with so many layers that are fundamentally tied to his state of being. He is so A lot of the things he does, or the actions he does, or the words he says have so many layers to them, dual sides. There's a flip side to everything he does, or not everything, but a lot of the things he does. His interactions with people are, in one way, very heartwarming, and in another, very lonely and sad. His motivations are, in some ways, kind of paradoxical while being completely organic at the same time. He's just such an interesting psychology, personality. He works in a very meta way as well, saying a lot of things about shonen in general and sort of discourse in general, while kind of embodying a lot of what we love about shonen and these sorts of stories. I think him talking to Geto and Nanami and Haibara in this dreamscape after his shocking, gut-wrenching, immediately cutting and just jarring death was so emotionally impactful. Seeing him talk to Geto, seeing Geto being emotional. There are multiple times throughout the chapter where he has tears in his eyes. Seeing him talk with Nanami, and the nuance and conflict about a lot of the things he says with Nanami, and the interactions with Haibara, which are very similar. We'll get into that in just a second. Seeing Riko, and the name of her caretaker escapes me, but seeing Riko and her, and the role they played in Gojo's life, and seeing them smile. Even seeing Toji in the back for a panel. It was all so emotionally impacting and such a great summation of Gojo's character. I thought it was beautiful. And then the cut to his body cut in half, him smiling, this bloody smile. It seemed like there was a smile on his lips, doing, in the end, what he loved, and in some ways being very satisfied while also being very regretful. And then cutting to Sukuna, who shows his immense appreciation for Satoru Gojo. It was just, that is the most I've ever felt for Sukuna, while also being a Gojo chapter and helping me appreciate a bunch of other characters quite a bit more. It was elevating, it was beautiful, the character work, the character writing was immense, and that leads me to my first sort of point that I wanted to talk about in my thread, and that is, essentially, the complaints about Gojo's character in 236 feel strange to me because if you ever could have asked for a more cohesive and consistent picture of who the man is and how he lives his life, 236 is it, and this is why I think that is. In my opinion, all you have to do is read between the lines in certain instances just a little bit, not take everything at face value, and not jump to the most uncharitable assumption of the writer. It's all written the same in 236 as it has been this entire time. And so this is where we get into the idea that I was kind of alluding to, in that it is as good an example of who Gojo is as a person and as a character as anything else in the series. In my opinion, it is, like, you can't get better than this. So I've seen a lot of criticism from people who think it's disloyal to his character, for a bunch of different reasons which I'll address. And I couldn't disagree more. I think this chapter addresses every part of him, and the things he withholds are done so for very deliberate reasons. You just kind of have to not take it at face value and look a little bit deeper and understand why he acts the way he does, why things are written the way they are, and sort of some of the expressions as well, and look at multiple perspectives of multiple characters to understand why this is, in my opinion, incredibly loyal to who Gojo is. Now, the first thing I want to say here is that Gojo doesn't automatically stop caring about his students and them spearheading the new generation just because he didn't mention them. He only just gives a little bit of an offhand comment about Megumi. But that aside, he doesn't talk about his students in the afterlife dreamscape to his old classmates. And lots of people have taken that as him not caring, along with Nanami's line, combining those two to make it seem like Gojo just didn't care about people, most especially the kids, which he seemed to dedicate a great portion of his life to, towards the end, to protect, to care for, to raise up, to give a figure to look up to for a lot of people who didn't have anything. Yuji, Megumi, Nobara, Yuta, for example. But he cares. He absolutely cares. He has always cared for them and has had full confidence about them leading the world into a new age and being alright, and it being alright as a result of that. He lingers primarily, the thing that's going on here is he lingers, if you look at the things he talks about how he regrets not being able to push Sukuna to his fullest, that he lost, that he wasn't able to win, and essentially a lot of the things having to do with his loss in the battle. And those are all his regrets. Those are all his regrets that he has about his life, especially like in the immediate aftermath. He talks to Geto and the others about things he could have changed or things he would have done differently if he had the power, or things that he wished could have turned out differently. However, he doesn't have any regrets or qualms about his students and the people he cared for. He has always had faith in them, and he has complete confidence that they will be okay, that they'll lead the world and the sorcery world, which he does care about, to a brighter future, or that they have the capability to turn it around. He thought that in Shibuya, he had trust in them that they could pull it out, and that they could save him, and that they could stop the worst case scenario in Shibuya. And his faith was, well, it's a bit conflicting, and things didn't turn out perfectly, but in some ways, in quite a few ways, his faith was rewarded. He had utmost confidence in them then, and he has the same now. He has faith, and he is confident in them, and he doesn't think that they're in a bad place. He doesn't have regrets about them. He doesn't have qualms about them. And that is why he doesn't talk about them, because he only talks about his regrets here, before moving on onto other topics, of course. But this chapter, to me, the core of it has to do with Gojo as a character, and a lot of that is centered on his regrets and the things he would have done differently. And the things he vocalizes have to do with those regrets, but it's the things that are unsaid, the subtext, that helps explain that he absolutely still cares for his students, and he did care for people, and he wasn't just this selfish monster. Satoru Gojo was twisted and insane and unhinged in points. He let his enlightenment and his kind of insane shonen mentality, if you want to put it that way, get the better of him. There are moments where he is self-aware of the fact that he is not thinking about other people. He was not thinking about Riko in his fight with Toji. He just kind of lost himself in the mesmeration and the ecstasy. And that is the twisted side of him. He could do that. But that does not at all mean that he did not also care for people, that he did not try to protect people, that he didn't care about sorcery going forward. He is a nuanced, complex individual with many layers and many angles, and the fact that he had this insane, unhinged side to him does not mean that he didn't care about others. So him not talking about or lingering on his students doesn't mean that he doesn't think about them or care about them. It just means he didn't have regrets with them, because he had full confidence in them, as he has always had this entire time. Now, the obvious rebuttal to that is Megami. Megami's being possessed by Sukuna. He's in a horrible state. We see him in this sort of psychological fetal position, and Gojo was fighting in large part to help Megami, and he failed. So that is an instant rebuttal you can have to that point, and I totally get that. But clearly, just as he trusted those around him to save, to salvage things in Shibuya, just as he trusted his students then, he trusts them again here to save Megami, clearly, because that is not something he seems to be worried about or regretting or fumbling around about in the afterlife. Clearly he trusts those he left the situation to succeed and do him proud. He mentioned Shoko, Yuji, Yuta, everyone around him. He thinks of them as a capable group, and he thinks of them as he's confident that they'll be able to turn the tide, as he was in Shibuya. Now, this is where we'll see if he was correct, if he is flawed in his thinking, if he is overly idealistic and positive and misplaced. We'll see if his faith and confidence are misplaced in the coming chapters, but the fact is, he has always been proud of and confident of and had faith in his students and the upcoming generation. That is why he doesn't talk about them here. That is why he's not overly worried about Megami, and he doesn't say that as part of his regrets here. He doesn't mention his students as much as he mentions his combat, because he doesn't have regrets about his students. And he doesn't have regrets because he has confidence that they'll be able to save Megami and lead the world forward and turn things around. Now, he may be mistaken in that. He may be mistaken, who's to say? But that is how he feels, and that is entirely in keeping with his character so far. A consistent theme is that he's never wanted those students, the upcoming generation, to heavily depend on him. In fact, he's always wanted the opposite, for multiple reasons. Partly for the good of the world and the sorcery world going forward, and for their good, because he cares for them, and them being dependent on him will not stand them in good stead. They won't be able to stand on their own 2 feet. He's always wanted that for them, and that's why he's found it gratifying that he believes that they can do this. So there's that, but there's also the fact that them being able to stand on their own 2 feet and not depend on him would have made him feel less alone. Because, as he says in this chapter, he has kind of isolated himself because of the power he has, because of the strength, because of the path he took. He has isolated himself from other people. That strength has made people admire him and look at him as strong. And you think of those extra pages of whenever people talk about him in that one issue, all they can talk about is how he was strong. They don't talk about him as a person, his personality, because that is what he has shown to the world. That is his lasting impact. That strength, that seemingly invincible strength that puts him on a level above everyone else, that makes him a symbol, that makes him almost inhuman in his strength. But that also isolates him. That also makes him feel completely on a different plane from everyone else. And that stops people from being able to properly connect with him. That's why, prior to his fight with Sukuna, I love that Yuji high-fived him. That he put down his guard and he had that human bit of interaction with Yuji, because I think he really needed that, and I think he really appreciates that. But the point is, he never wanted them to depend on him for multiple reasons, and because of that, he has built them up in this specific way to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and he feels that they can do it. Just like in Shibuya, he has full faith that they will do him proud. Now, Nanami says in the chapter something to the extent of, you never really cared about protecting the sorcery world going forward, or protecting others, or caring for others. You were just in life in general, in it for the self-satisfaction, for the joy you got from fights. That is what Nanami says, and a lot of people take issue with that. And I would too, if it felt to me like Nanami's point of view was the correct or the true point of view, but it's not. Just because a character says something in a story does not necessarily mean that the story is touting that to be the truth, because Nanami didn't actually properly know Gojo to the truest extent. So let me start from the beginning. Him not correcting Nanami when he says that he never cared about protecting others or the sorcery world doesn't mean that he agrees with him. It means that he understands his viewpoint because the way he lived life made that a very fair assumption to make. Gojo understands that he is unhinged, that he can be crazy, that he can forget all around him and lose himself in fights in a very, like I said, insane way. And others have made note of that, especially those closest to him. So he does not blame them for thinking that about him, because if he was in their perspective, he would probably think the exact same thing. He takes complete responsibility for others misunderstanding him because he lives in a way that makes misunderstanding very, very possible, very common. He doesn't make it clear the type of person he is because he puts his all into his combat, into becoming the honored one, into all of that. And as a result, others will misunderstand him, and he understands that, and that is part of the loneliness that he talked to Geto about. Nanami saying this isn't something new. Nanami, and Haibara too, clearly, because he says this as well during the chapter, has always thought that about Gojo, and Gojo's never thought to correct him in the past because he's been sadly self-aware about the wall his way of life put up between him and other people. That's the sad fact of it. Gojo lived in a way that made other people understanding him very difficult. He was a difficult person to parse out, and I think it's kind of metatextually very, very appropriate that, in my opinion, a lot of people are not seeing this with regards to him. I think it's very appropriate that people are seeing this chapter as portraying him as completely self-centered and not caring for others, because that is how he's been misunderstood in universe his entire life. But that isn't the truth. Nanami believes this, Haibara believes this, and they were very close to him, and that's deeply sad because these people who he feels such connection and affection for don't actually get him. And the loneliness of that, it must just be so suffocating. So people seem to fixate on the fact that Gojo doesn't tell Nanami, no, that isn't true. He doesn't try to correct him. He doesn't say, no, I cared for people. I wasn't just doing it for self-satisfaction. Because the truth is, he was doing it for self-satisfaction. He's going to be the first to admit that. But there is more to it. He absolutely cared for other people. He absolutely cared for the next generation. And he absolutely also cared for the sorcery worlds going forward. I think primarily because of how it would affect those he cared for. So a lot of people focus on the fact that Gojo didn't correct him as the story saying that Gojo is accepting what he says as the truth and agreeing with him, but it isn't. Because, like I said, Gojo has never done that in the past. He's never done it because he understands why Nanami feels that way, and he just doesn't find it he just never, for one reason or another, just due to his personality and due to the fact that he understands that and thinks it's fair, sadly fair, he's never thought to correct him. He's never done it. But don't fixate too much on what he says or doesn't say here, because he's been doing this all along with Nanami, not correcting him, not telling him how he really feels despite him misunderstanding him. And no one's really had any problems with assuming that Gojo or thinking that Gojo cared for people prior to this. So let's actually look at his expression. I don't have this on screen, so you're gonna have to go to the chapter. But when Nanami says this stuff to Gojo, he looks extremely upset. He actually looks, in my opinion, the most upset he does throughout this entire chapter, in a chapter where he accepts that he's been killed, or comes to terms with it, because maybe, I don't know, I don't think it's 100% confirmed that he does die. We'll talk about that later, but nonetheless, he is coming to terms with the fact that he lost, and a lot of upsetting things are coming to dawn on him. And the most upset he looks, in my opinion, in this chapter is when Nanami says, "You did this all for your self-satisfaction." Just look at his expression. He looks deeply, deeply upset and concerned by that, because he's being misunderstood. That isn't how he truly feels. And there's a bit of exchange between Haibara and Nanami after that, and then Nanami says, well, it seems I was on the money, is what he says. And again, Gojo looks annoyed and very perturbed and concerned and upset by him saying that. Those are the two expressions that I think are the most negative from Gojo, and they're when shown in response to what Nanami says about him only caring about his own satisfaction and not other people, and not protecting the sorcery world going forward. I think that says something. The foundation of this is based in something visual, not just what is being said or not said, but also the expressions here. Gege would not have illustrated him that way for no reason. If Gojo really, truly didn't care about others like Nanami is saying, he would have just had a blanker expression. He would have had an accepting expression, but he's deeply worried instead. What does that tell us? He doesn't agree, but he doesn't say anything because he's never said anything because of all the reasons I mentioned before. He's upset about this because it isn't the truth, but as he always has, he lets this pass because he understands that his life was lived in a way that brought about misunderstanding about where his heart truly lied. Gojo cares for others plenty, and this chapter does not contradict that. Nanami was one of his closest friends, and yet he never properly knew him, not due to not trying to understand, but just due to logically interpreting what he saw. Gojo feels like he can have no complaints because he isolated himself due to his way of life. And in addition to this, I think there's another layer. I think there's an element of self-punishment there too, in addition. He perpetuates his own desolation, and I feel like he hates that, because if he did not live life this way, if he didn't get a kick and have fun out of living life the way he does, he would not be this lonely. And so I think there's an element of self-punishment, like maybe I deserve others misunderstanding me because I perpetuate this. This is my choice. I am the reason that others misunderstand me. And so I think that deep down, this may be a bit of headcanon, but I think it's, I don't really think so. I think there's enough subtext there, and I think it fits in with the character for there to be substance there. I really feel like he perpetuates his own desolation, and he doesn't, he despises that about himself. He thinks that, in a sense, maybe he deserves it, because he's very self-aware. He's a very self-aware person. So I think he sees that, and he doesn't like it, and he thinks, what else, like, why do you deserve others to understand you when you live in a way that perpetuates this misunderstanding? So I think there's complexity there, and yet, on the other hand, he admits that he deeply enjoys it. So I don't know if he would change it. I don't know if he would change the way he lives life. He doesn't talk about, like, I wish I did things different in terms of my whole life at the end, when he talks about his regrets. He only talks about the fight, and how he wishes he could have won, and shown Sukuna the pain and misery and agony of being on top, of strength. It's a paradoxical situation led by both instinct and the heart that leaves him forlorn and yearning for proper connection despite making his decision definitively throughout his life. That loneliness is one of the saddest things about Gojo, if not the saddest, and it's what he tried and failed to communicate to Sukuna through combat, and that is something that he talks about that he wishes he was able to do. Because maybe, if Sukuna were able to understand that, Gojo would finally have someone who wholeheartedly, 100% understood him. and maybe he wouldn't feel quite as alone as he does. Even his, what a lot of people look at as his soulmate, and I agree, in Geto, cannot properly understand him because of this plane he puts himself on. Yuji, Megumi, Yuta, Nanami, all these people, Shoko, all these people who are close to him, who are the closest people in the world to him, do not properly understand him. But maybe he hoped that through combat, in the most shonen meathead way possible, maybe Sukuna could have understood him. But because he failed, he wasn't able to find a person he could connect with 100%. And I think he regrets that. I think he feels lonely. And also, that's in addition to all the other stuff. Saving Megami, saving the sorcery world, saving the ones he cares about, of course. But I also think, as with everything with Gojo, with the care for others, there is always a layer of selfishness. And his selfishness here was wanting to be understood. That is why he talks about Sukuna in the way he does. That flower that can be appreciated by others, but not understood. And also with regards to this, it's kind of strange to me to think of Gojo losing. I've seen this sentiment. People have said that it was all for nothing. Gojo achieved nothing, and so it feels like a wet fish of an ending for his character arc, because he doesn't achieve anything. He doesn't win. The story doesn't have impact as a result. However, Gojo, despite losing, quote unquote, losing a lot of 3 significant fights throughout his life against Toji, leading to a lot of pain and misery, against Kenjaku and being sealed, and here. He lost those 3 key fights throughout his life, which I think is pretty defining. But nonetheless, he has been achieving, quote-unquote, his entire life outside of those. And that is what has caused him to be in this state of isolation, of desolation. And so, something had to give. At some point in the story, there had to be a change with Satoru Gojo, and this is it. Him losing here, him finally being defeated, and it seems like him dying, him not achieving when it really mattered most in the world. That is a true change, because those achievements are what isolated him and caused him such pain. Now, him not achieving anything here is thematically appropriate and has much more impact than if he won. He would have continued along the way he always had been. He'd be happy because he would have saved those he cared about, but he wouldn't have been able to internalize in this way. He wouldn't have been able to look at himself and contemplate his own loneliness in this way, now that he was forced to see it, now that he failed to find someone he could connect with. He wouldn't have looked at it this way. He would have kept going the same way he always has, not really addressing the core problem, the story not being able to address that. Something had to give, and this loss shifts the emphasis to those he trusts so much to carry the torch. Whether he lives or dies past this point, I don't think that he will be the strongest anymore. We'll get into this in a bit, but I do, if I had to guess, I think he's dead. But if he doesn't die, I don't think he's going to be the strongest anymore. And so the torch will be passed to those he cares about, to the next generation, to Yuji, to Yuta, maybe Megami if he gets out of it. So that shift is absolutely necessary for him to lower himself and for others to raise themselves and not depend on him as much anymore. That's what he always wanted, and this is maybe what makes him feel the most satisfaction in this moment that he can. That others will raise themselves up after this point, and that he has lowered himself after this, and that maybe because of this, he isn't quite so unreachable anymore. I think something inside him reaches out for that idea, because that's something that's tormented him forever. And along with just simply being with those he cares about in this dreamscape, I think that's part of the reason why he says, I hope this isn't a dream. Now, those are a lot of rambling thoughts of Gojo, and why I think it's all super cohesive and why I think it all fits. I'm sure that wasn't super communicated in the best possible way, but hopefully my thoughts were clear enough. So yeah, and also there's been a lot of criticism about the fight being off-screened. For me, I'm gonna be honest, I read the chapter and not once while reading it did I think, oh, that felt weird, like that felt odd that it was off-screened, that's not satisfying. I think it worked perfectly in the dramatic flow of the chapter, and I loved it. But I do understand that some others would have wanted to see it play out. I think when it comes to that, it's just that we view stories different ways. But for me, the flow and structure of the chapter, the dreamscape, into the sharp, brutal cut into Gojo with his bloody smirk, his bloody smile, seeing him cut in half. The gut reaction, the gut punch I felt was so visceral, so affecting. It is one of the most visceral reactions to fiction I've had in ages, and I loved it. I was in immense pain, but reactions like this are what I read fiction for, or what I experience fiction for, and I wouldn't have wanted that changed at all. That wouldn't have been able to be replicated if the chapter went by in any other way, so I am totally fine with it being off-screened. And well, it's interesting to see a lot of people who seem deeply upset about this, when for me it just felt completely natural. I really didn't feel any need to see it all play out. I had seen them fight for chapters on end, and I just didn't really feel I needed it. It was only after seeing Twitter that I realized that people were actually up in arms about it. Like I said, I just think that people that felt that way, I think that's totally natural and logical and valid, and it makes sense. I think that's totally fair. I think that those people just look at art and storytelling different than I do in ways that I don't exactly know how to properly articulate in this moment right now. And I think that's very fair. I see logically how this could feel like a letdown for someone who has that sort of perspective. Although, just to go on a tangent for a little bit, what is a shame is that I've seen lots of people mock others for thinking of this as a great chapter when the end of the fight was off-screened, as if that's some huge indictment of their analytical ability or credibility or just them as a person. And I think that's totally ridiculous and childish, because there are no rules to storytelling. Everything's contextual. There is no template, there's no checklist that makes it a fact that off-screening the end of a huge fight is automatically bad. Because it isn't. It's all about execution, and that's the point of discussion. The execution. I can love it, and you can dislike it, and we can talk about why I loved it and why you disliked it, and maybe come to an understanding, even if we disagree. But neither of us should completely hand-wave and dismiss the other person's opinion simply because we believe that inherently the story did something objectively wrong. That isn't how stories work. Everything has to do with context and execution. So it's all about execution and why we believe the execution succeeded or didn't succeed. That's what discussion should be founded on. But I think a lot of times people think of, they have this set list or checklist or template that stories must follow to be good. I've seen this all over the place. I've seen this with Hunter x Hunter. I've seen this with series, Final Fantasy VII Remake, I've seen it with all sorts of series, all over the place. People have in their minds a checklist of things that stories must do to be good. And if they don't do a certain thing, or if they do a bad thing, if they check off a list on the a thing on the bad list, that automatically means that it's bad. And I think that poisons discourse. Because the beauty of stories, a huge part of the beauty of stories, is that they can be executed in an infinite number of ways. And that execution is what we judge, not the actual bare bones things that happen themselves. Everything has to do with the execution. Ideas or plot points themselves are not inherently good or bad, and execution's everything. I just wish that people would understand that and be respectful without shutting opinions down in a mean-spirited way. But, you know, that's Twitter, that's the internet, maybe that's hoping for too much, I don't know. And just to be clear, I think this is made clear, but just to clarify, I am not saying that anyone who disagrees with me is, and thinks that it was bad that it was off-screen, is looking at things in this checklist sort of way. I'm saying that some people are, by the way that they've expressed their distaste for the chapter. I'm not saying that everyone who thinks that is thinking about it the wrong way. I'm just saying that's what I've seen in some of the criticisms. That's all. If you're listening to this and you hated that it was off-screen, but you don't look at things in that way, then I'm not talking about you, of course. Just to wrap things up, I did say I had one minor problem with the chapter, and that is that it felt very whiplashy in an immersion-breaking way to go from the end of 235, saying, Gojo's won, into the dreamscape immediately. I felt like we could have used another page or two to sort of transition into it. I love the jarring cut, but I needed a bit more of a lead-in into it. I think when they adapt that in the anime, they're going to have to do some clever editing to make that feel like it flows properly. And I know it's not supposed to flow. I know it's not supposed to flow like a river. It's supposed to be shocking. Because Gojo himself, like, kind of is in disbelief when we cut to him in the dreamscape. It's supposed to be jarring, but I think it was a bit too whiplashy jarring. I think there needs to be a tiny bit of a mechanism to make it flow into itself. So 235 into 236 felt a bit off to me. That's my one minor problem, but it's not a big deal. All in all, I think 236 was a masterpiece. The presentation and structure were bold, but they worked super well for me. The story content and character writing were emotional, super impactful, and elevating. I loved seeing Geto again. It elevated Gojo for me, and like I said, Sukuna's line at the end made me feel the most I've ever felt for him. I think it was all wonderful. I think it was beautiful. I think it looked great. The structure was on point and gut-wrenching in the best possible way. I think it was all great. I'm a huge fan of it, and hopefully I've adequately described why I don't really agree with most of the criticisms I'm seeing. Now, obviously, with such a volatile, dividing, divisive chapter, I don't expect everyone to agree with me, but hopefully this helps you see where I'm coming from, when I don't really think that most of the criticisms I've seen are too, I don't think they pan out. But of course, maybe you disagree with me, and you can explain it in a way that may make me see where you're coming from. This can go both ways, of course. So please let me know one way or another in the comments in a way that, is obviously respectful and nice. Hopefully I've conducted myself in that way. I think I have. So I just ask for the same. Now, with regards to going forward, like I said, I don't know necessarily that Gojo is 100% dead. I think it's the most likely thing to happen, but there was that talk with Nanami about going north or south, whereas south is staying the same and north would be changing herself. And I've seen others theorize that the plane can symbolize Gojo choosing to go north or going north. And also the imagery of the flowers being representative of rebirth or something like that. I don't know that intimately, but I've seen that as well. And maybe that Gojo will be reborn as Satoru Gojo, not the strongest, not the immortal, not this person above everyone else, but just Satoru Gojo, while others pick up the torch and carry on his will. And he sees others kind of surpass him, and it humanizes him, and that could be lovely. I do see that as plausible, especially because Gojo made a huge deal about Toji not destroying his head all the way back in Hidden Inventory, and his head was not destroyed. So I do think it's possible that he isn't completely dead or comes back, but I think of that as unlikely. Unlikely, but possible. We'll see how it goes going forward. Now, with future plot points, to me it would feel right for Megami to be saved in some way. I think it makes sense for me for Megami to be saved. I don't know, especially given Gojo's death and his confidence in his students, and just for the narrative, I don't know, the dramatic flow. I think that the structure of the story, I just think that Megami needs to be saved. That's how I've always felt, but especially more so now. But I could be a clown, I could be misinterpreting, I could be wrong. We'll see how it goes in the upcoming chapters. Also, Nobara needs to come back. I miss her. At this point, I will think I don't want to say 100%, but 98% sure. I will find it pretty, at this point, Gege is really stretching it out with Nobara. I really think this needs to be concluded one way or another, and if it's concluded that she's actually dead, I think there's been too many breadcrumbs leading to the idea that she is alive, and I think that would be Gege manipulating the audience in a way that isn't substantial, and so I would think that I'd probably think that's bad writing. I wouldn't enjoy that much. I think Gege needs to bring her back, and pretty soon. That's just my take on it, though. Maybe I'm coping, because I really like her as a character, but hey. Anyways, I can't wait to see where the story goes from here. I'm really excited to see how it concludes and ramps up. I don't know how the fight's going to continue, but I'm really interested. I'm on board. I trust it, and I really enjoyed this chapter. I think it was a masterpiece. Not necessarily perfect, not that it'll necessarily lead to perfect things, and the horizon is scary. We don't know how it'll go, and it's not a guarantee that it'll be flawless, but I have faith, and the chapter itself I deeply enjoyed and I think connected to everything in the story. I don't think there was a hair out of place. And hopefully you've enjoyed hearing my thoughts on it, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. Thank you guys so much for listening to this ramble. Hopefully there was some cohesive train of thought and it wasn't totally nonsense. And yeah, thank you so much. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I will have a Haikyuu video releasing in the next few days. There will also be the next One Piece video, the Dressrosa video, going on Patreon, meaning that the next, the Punk Hazard video will be going up live on YouTube, so there's plenty of stuff on the horizon. And I also have a Nanami video for JJK that's going to release when the anime episode, you know the one, releases as well. So there's plenty on the horizon. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good one, guys.